Here we're on Daf Chav Tesam and Peish. Shkol mina chayfetz v'hadar havale gita. He said to the shliach, I want you to first take back the chayfetz before you give the get. It's almost like he's threatening the isha. I'm not going to give you the get until you return the object. And the shliach on his own decided to give her the get straight away, and then he took back the object. And this is going to be a machlok stream of Yochanan Reish Lakish. I mean, Reish Lakish is saying that he got back the object at the end of the day. But Rabbi Yochanan says, no, the Baal was makpid, that first he should get the object back and only then give the get. And if a posilbo, this get is going to be possible. The shliach himself has violated his shlichus. That's called shinui. Instead of giving it on the bottom floor, he gave it on the top floor, and gave him the right hand, he gave him the left hand. Instead of getting the object back, first he gave him the get first, the goals came to shlucha. Now, if the shliach sheni makes a shinui, and the shliach rishon made a shinui by giving it over to the shliach sheni, that's for sure. Reish Lakish savar, he holds machshir b'shlucho v'kol shkein bo. So if the shliach sheni makes a shinui and he gives the get before he gets back to chayfetz, that's considered a get kosher, and how much more so in the case of shliach rishon. So this leads us to the Mishnah here on the top of Chav Tesam in Beis. And this is the second side of the same coin of the previous Mishnah. Hamevi get me the dinas hayam. Now we need testimony on behalf of the shliach, on the part of the shliach, b'fanei nechtam v'chol. So now we have a double problem. Why? Because first we have the problem of shliach passing on his shlichus. Okay, we'll find the solution to that problem because he's chola. But we have another problem of b'fanei nechtam, the second shliach, when he brings the get to Eretz Yisrael in front of the bezdin, he cannot testify b'fanei nechtam. Therefore, the Mishnah establishes Ose Shliach bezdin. Make sure that when you, the first shliach, are appointing a second, you do it in front of bezdin, and there you will testify b'fanei nechtam. Once bezdin has established that the shtar is a shtar mekuyo, and there's no chashash of ziyuf or of shalol lishma, the get is kosher. Now you can appoint a second shliach, mishalcho. The Omer Lifneim b'fanei nechtam. The Ein HaShliach Achron Tzorach Sheyomer b'fanei nechtam. In other words, even though this get is coming from Chutz La'aretz, it's being delivered to the hands of the woman in Eretz Yisrael by the second shliach. Nevertheless, despite if he cannot say b'fanei nechtam, the get is kosher because the first shliach established in the first bezdin b'fanei nechtam. Omer Shliach Bezdin ani. I was sent by the first bezdin. And the first bezdin accepted the edus of the shliach rishon b'fanei nechtam, and everything is kosher. Gemara says, "Amalei Rabbanan lavimi breid Rav Abo boy minei Rav Abo." Ask your father the following question: Shaliach to shaliach, mashvei shliach. Can the second shliach appoint a third shliach? Oh, lo. Maybe the Chazal said that the first shliach could appoint a second shliach. But the second shliach cannot appoint a third shliach. Amar lahu, holoti boilechu. I'm not even going to ask my father this question. It's not even a suffix. Midik Tani says ein shliach ha'achron. It doesn't say shliach ha'sheni. It says shliach ha'achron, the last one. Does not have to recite the famous line b'fanei nechtam b'chlal the mashri shliach. Apparently, the second shliach appointed a third shliach. Who's the achron? If you have a suffix and you have a good question to ask, ki mashvei shliach bebezdin o afilu shelo bebezdin. The question that you should ask is that when the second shliach appoints a third shliach, is it necessary that he do that in front of bezdin? Amru later, Rabbana respond to Avimi, Holomi Boila, even that's not a question. We don't have a suffix about that. The very fact that the shliach declares, I'm a shliach of Bezdin, then he can rely on the fact that in that Bezdin, they were Makayim the shtar with the Fanei Nechtam from the shliach Rishon. Rav Nachman Yitzchak Masni Hachi, he had a slightly variant transmission of the same discussion. Amrulei Rabban Lavimi Berei Rav Obo. I ask your father the following question, Rav Obo. Shliach, the second shliach that was appointed by the first shliach, ki mashvei shliach, when he appoints a third shliach, is bebezdin or shalo bebezdin. So the original question that was asked and meant to be presented to Rabbi Avo was not about whether the second shliach could appoint a third shliach. That was upgrade. That was certain that the second shliach could appoint a third shliach. The only question he had was, does he require bezdin? So the Gemara says, Omer Lahu, Avimi says to the rabbis, V'ti boilechu I mashvei shaliach bi alma, whether the second shliach could make a third shliach. Amrulei holo mikboile. That is not a suffix. I know that the second shliach could appoint the third shliach. Minisnan, it says in the Mishnah, Einan shliach ha'achron, and the word achron indicates michlal the shliach mashvei shliach. You could have a third shliach. Elakami boilan, but what we do have a suffix about is bifnei bezdin or shalo bifnei bezdin. Does the second shliach, when he appoints the third shliach, require in front of a bezdin? Amalahu hanami, the Rabbanan answered, Avimi hanami lo tiboy. That's not a question at all. The Ketani Ella Omer Shaliach Bezdin Ani. Once he identifies himself as a Shaliach Bezdin, that's enough, and it's irrelevant as to whether or not he was appointed in the presence of a Bezdin. Now, here I want to, how do you say, be modal emes, that the Masifta has a different approach than I do. And what does it say here? Ella Omer, at the moment that he delivers the get to the wife, and we're talking about the Shliach Shlishi, he declares Shliach Bezdin. And he writes the following. This is Masifta. I don't know what your commentary says. Muchach shetzarach levnoso bebezdin k'dei sheyuchal lo shliach bezdin. In other words, he's not learning the way I learned, that the third shliach is testifying that the second shliach who appointed him was a shliach bezdin, but rather he's saying I'm a shliach bezdin, and that means that I was appointed by the bezdin. Omar Rabba shliach be'eretz Yisrael osa kama shluchim. Rabbah says that in the case of Shliach of Eretz Yisrael, which does not require b'fanei nechtam, then if he cannot bring the get himself, then he can make a whole series of shlichus, meaning he could appoint a second shliach, and the second shliach could appoint a third shliach, and you don't need to appoint him in front of a bezdin. The only reason we need a minui in front of a bezdin is so that the shliach could now say, the second shliach could say, I am a shliach bezdin, which means that bezdin received the testimony b'fanei nechtam, but in Eretz Yisrael, where we don't need b'fanei nechtam, then you don't need bezdin. Omar Rav Ashi says that if a shliach makes another second shliach, and the second shliach makes a third shliach, in Meis Rishon, Batlu Kulam. Everyone depends, this entire string, on the first shliach. If the shliach dies, the first shliach, Nebuchadnezzar was a chol and he died, then none of the shluchim can be considered shluchim and they cannot deliver the get. Omar Rabba Avashi, Hadi Abba de Katnusahi. My father made this statement and issued this ruling in his youth. But really, if he would hear the argument that I'm about to present in his mature years, then he would certainly rescind what he says. Why? Because ilu beis habal midi meshasha ispehu is kula mikoch mankos and mikoch the balkos. Isa the baal, isa the kula. Less of the baal, less of the kula. Everyone depends upon the baal. It's not that everyone depends upon the first shliach. The first shliach depends upon the baal, and the second shliach depends upon the baal, and the third shliach on the baal. If the baal dies, then the whole string of shlichus is all bottom of vuto. But we don't care whether the first shliach died. The second shliach stands in place of the first shliach, with a direct relationship to the Baal. But less of the Baal, less of the Kula. Hahu gaver the shodele Gittin l'beisa, he sent to get with the shliach. Omar shliach, the shliach says to the Baal, lo yadanala, I don't know who she is. Omar le zil yahava li Abba bar Yomi the iu yadale. Give over the get to Abba bar Yomi because he knows, he recognizes my wife. V'lezel v'leis v'nil. He says, "Ubimena ani es Abba bar Yozi she umeman." I'm sorry, that I didn't read it with the right vocalization. I'm appointing now Abba bar Yomi to deliver the get. You won't be able to deliver the get because you don't recognize her. Also, the shliach came and he couldn't find Abba bar Yomi. He's in desperate states because he's got to go wherever he has to go. He can't wait for Abba bar Yomi. Ashkeche, he finds three great Amoraim: Rabbi Avo, Rabbi Chanina bar Papa, and Rabbi Yitzchak Naf. The Yosef, Rav Safra Gabayu. Rav Safra was like an apprentice. He wasn't part of the actual Bezdin. And now the shliach says to these three great ayonim, what should I do with the get? Amrulei. So Rabbi Avo, Rabbi Chanina, and Rabbi Yitzchak say to the shliach, Misar Milach, testify in our presence, b'fanei nechtam, coming to be done in our presence. And and when Abba bar Yomi will come, we will give the get over to Abba bar Yomi. After all, the Baal had appointed Abba bar Yomi as his shliach because the first shliach didn't recognize his wife. And Abba bar Yomi will deliver the get. Amalahu, Rav Safra was sitting on the side, and he had a problem with this. How could the shliach appoint these three Amoraim as their shlichim to give over the get to Abba bar Yomi? V'ha shliach shelo nita l'gerishin hu of Safra. What is this principle called shliach shelo nita l'gerishin? You cannot appoint a shliach who's incapable of fulfilling his shlichus. And these great Amoraim were not appointed by the Baal to divorce his wife, but rather to give over the get to Abba bar Yomi. But they are doing nothing except for giving over the get to Abba bar Yomi. They cannot serve as shlichim because they weren't appointed as a shliach. And they don't have the capability of giving the get because the Baal wants Abba bar Yomi to give the get. Ichsafu. And the Rabbanim were very embarrassed after Rav Safra put forth his argument. And now we're going to have a whole sugya in the Gemara about whether or not Rav Safra's argument was really a valid argument. Okay, I'm going to move over back to my room. My wife was supposed to use the computer there. And I don't know, she doesn't see, maybe she finished already with the computer. What about Rava? Rava actually accepts the argument and validates the argument of Rav Safra. Even though Rav Safra is only a Talmud, but nevertheless, in this particular case, he successfully argued a valid argument against these three great Chachamim. What are you talking about? Rav Safra's argument is not a valid argument. Mika Amar Le, did the Baal say to the Shliach, Abba bar Yomi v'lo ato? Was he saying that only Abba bar Yomi is appointed as my Shliach and not the Shliach? He definitely appointed the Shliach. He wants the Baal the Baal wants to appoint a shliach to give the get, and if that shliach could give the get himself, that's fine. Just that there was a problem that he didn't recognize his wife, and therefore he said, you know what, take advantage of Abba bar Yomi because he does recognize my wife. But basically, he appointed the shliach like any other shliach to be Megarish's wife, and therefore he can appoint a second shliach. Ike the Amri, the Gemara now has a second lishna regarding the dialogue here between Rava and Ravashi. Omar Rava. According to this version, Rava said the following: Kapchinu Rav Safra l'tlos rabbanan smuchi b'ta'usa. Rav Safra made a mistake here. B'ta'usa, when he tried to counter-argue against the three Chachamim, he made a big mistake. And his Taina has no Taina. The Chachamim were right. And Omar Rav Ashi, and it was Rav Ashi on the other end who rejected Rava and said that Rav Safra's argument was a correct argument. My ta'usa. This is not a ta'us. Rav Safra was not mistaken. Maika Omar Le, what did the Baal say to the Shliach? Abba Bar Yomi should be my Shliach. Veloat. And not you. You don't recognize my wife. I want Abba Bar Yomi to be my Shliach. And therefore, you're only meant to give over the get to my real shliach, who's Abba Bar Yomi. Therefore, Rav Safra was correct in his argument that this shliach is not a shliach legerish, and he cannot appoint a second shliach. A man said to shliach to divorce his wife Yomalei, and the Baal said to the shliach, Lo teisvei ni'ala ad talsin yomin. Don't give the get until after 30 days. Itnis. Now the shliach took ill bego plus and yom during this 30-day period, and he could not fulfill his shlichus and deliver the get to his wife after the 30-day period would pass. Also, Lakami to Rava, and he came in front of Rava to ask, can he appoint a second shliach? Amar Rava, since we learned in our Mishnah that if a shliach rishon is chola and he's honest and he cannot fulfill his shlichus, then he can appoint a second shliach. B'taima mai. And why is it that in the case of a chola, he can appoint a second shliach? Mishum di'anus, because he cannot possibly fulfill his shlichus, so therefore he appoints someone as a replacement in his place. Hainami anasu. Here too, the shliach was an anus. Amalei. So therefore, Rava says to shliach, Misar milach, testify here, b'fanei nechtam, in front of our Bezdin, comedy done. The lebasa tosa yomin mashvina and shliach v'yoevle nila. And when the 30-day period will lapse, then we will be a shliach in your place, and we'll guarantee that the get reaches the hands of the isha. Amrule. So the Rabbanan were amazed at this ruling of Rava. So they said to Rava, shliach shalita the gerishinu. After all, his shlichus lends itself to fulfillment only after 30 days. And in the middle of the 30 days, he cannot be Megarisha. So therefore, he's not a shlich legerishin. And basically, if he's not a shlich legerishin, then he cannot appoint another shliach. Amalahusa, Rabbi responded, since after 30 days, he will be able to serve as a shliach to deliver the get, is kishliach shenita legerishinu. It's as if he received from the Baal the koach to be Megarish. Back to Gemara, the Rabbanan ask Rabba, V'leifa shemet pies. Maybe we should be afraid if a get is going to be delivered after 30 days, the Baal maybe changed his mind and they reconciled, the relationship, and therefore it's a get Yoshon, and he's not allowed to be Megarish with it. Now, the reason we get Yoshan is what's called a chashash yichud. That perhaps during this period of time, after he reconciled with his wife, maybe he had a private seclusion with his wife, Milo Tanan, and we have a Mishnah later on at Daf Ayin Vavam in Beis, where a man gives a get to his wife when he's on his way out, he's going Yotze L'Derech, and he makes a Tanai at the time of the delivery of the get, and he says, this should be your get. It'll be chal now if I don't return in the next 12 months. But if I return in the next 12 months, then the get is not chal. Meis betoch shnei masar chodesh. So again, he didn't return within the 12 months, but it was because he died. So therefore, the t'nai of I won't come within 12 months was actually fulfilled, and therefore I raise a get. The get is lemafreya from the time of the Sina, chal, and it's valid. Bavinamba, and the Gemara there, Daf Ayin Vav Amid Beis asked the Kashman Nefesh P.A.s. Maybe during that 12-month period they reconciled, and he had yichud with her, and the get is called the get yoshan, and it's possible. Amar Rabba Barafuna, to explain why we're not choshesh that maybe there was a piyus. Hachi Omar Abba Mori Mishmei Derav. The Mishnah that says that this get is kosher, even though it was given on a Tanai of Liachar Zman, is Bi Omer Nemenes Alai. What does this mean? The Baal said in front of Bezdin, when he gave the get to the Isha, Nemenes Alai Lomar Shalobas. She is believed as if she was 1,000 witnesses that if I will ever come and question the validity of the get and argue that it's a get yoshan because I had yichud with her, she would be believed to say lo basi. Lo basi means that you didn't come, we didn't have any close relationship, there was no yichud. And once he gave emuna, he was ma'amino mitchila, he can no longer say, I want to be ma'ar on the get. And how much more so, Bezdin is not going to be ma'ar on the kashas of this get. So since Rav interpreted our Mishnah as a case of Omeres Nemenes Alai, that she's believed, it implies that if he didn't say those words, Shetei Nemenes Alai, Lomar Shaloba, then we should be Choshesh, maybe had yichud with her. So why was Rava machsha the get that came in front of him when not being Choshesh that maybe had yichud with her? Ichsa. And Rava became embarrassed. He didn't have a counter argument. So, however, later on, Iglai Milsa, the Arusa Havi, that this case was a woman who was an Arusa. So he was Makadisha, but he wasn't Noseo L'chuppah. He didn't take her into the chuppah. He sent a get with a shliach to be Megarish. Amar Rava, Im Omer b'Nisua, Yomu b'Arusa. In the case of Nisu, we have to be Choshesh for get Yoshan, that maybe they were Nispayes, and he was Miyachid with her. But in the case of an Arusa, we don't have that chiba. They never actually consummated the marriage, and therefore not Choshesh for get Yoshan. And therefore, my original psak was correct. Omar Rava, ha vadi komi boilon. There's no question that we should have a suffix. Ki mashvu here on the top of the lamed. Bezdin shliach b'fanav o shalo b'fanav. When they appoint Bezdin as a replacement of the shliach of the Baal, does the first shliach have to be there present, or does he not have to be present? And let's say, for example, the first shliach was an onus, and he had to go wherever he had to go. And he's giving the get over to Bezdin, and he's saying, B'fani nechtam, then Yachal hu leilech l'darko, he can go wherever he has to go. Bezdin will appoint another shliach, he doesn't have to be there. Shalom b'fanav. Hadar pashta, bein b'fanav, bein shalom b'fanav. Rava came to the final conclusion that the Bezdin could be appointed as a second shliach, whether or not the first shliach is there and present or not. And Sholchu Misam, they said from Eretz Yisrael that the din is like Rava, Bein B'fanav, Ubein B'shalom B'fanav, the second shliach can be appointed by Bezdin, even if the first shliach is not present. So this is where we're going to stop for today. And Mitzvah tomorrow, the shir is a little bit later at 9:45. Have a great day.